Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we're putting on our feet. Today's episode number 98. We have a very full roundtable today. We have the usual. We have Matt, we have David, and we have myself. But we have two very exciting guests with us today from New Balance. We have Danny Orr and Ethan Steiner. Danny Orr is the GM of performance running, and Ethan is a sports research engineer. And so today we get to talk to them all about New Balance with a little bit of an extra focus on the new shoe that is just coming out, the New Balance SC Trainer. So this is a really exciting shoe. It has a lot of unique features to it that we're excited to dive into. All of us have had a lot of testing, and you can read all of our thoughts on our full written review on doctorsofrunning.com. But we're here to get some insight from Danny and Ethan about the development of the shoe and what's been going on with it, as well as all things New Balance. So Danny and Ethan, thank you so much for joining the roundtable today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So let's start with you guys, just to get a background into who you are. Ethan, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in research, your background in running, and how you came to work at New Balance and kind of what you do with them?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in upstate New York and then went to college at UMass Amherst, originally thinking about doing physical therapy. I have a degree in kinesiology. And then while I was there, I was lucky enough to do some, just be a participant in some research involving biomechanics and actually footwear development at the time. So from there, I thought it was really cool. I was always been a big sneakerhead growing up. So from there, I kind of started pursuing down that lane. So I got my master's at UMass as well, with kind of a focus in biomechanics and then footwear specifically. And then I was lucky enough to get an internship at New Balance after I completed my master's. And then I stayed on full time. So now I work in the sports research lab at New Balance, primarily with the running team, really focused on kind of development, research, and anything trying to understand, all these great shoes that we're able to bring to life.
That's great. And Danny, how about you? What's your journey been like?
I feel like I've been at New Balance most of my life at this point, it seems like. But I started in 2011 working in the European business on the running team as kind of the MEA product and merchandising person. I then was lucky enough to get an opportunity to move over to the US in 2013 and take a role on our kind of international team, continuing to look after Europe, but then also Latin America, Asia Pacific. New Balance Japan is a massive market for us, but essentially everything that wasn't North America. And that was creating product that was more specific for those places, maybe than America, or making sure we had the right colors for those areas, making sure we were merchandising the line as we want to. And then I was lucky enough to move on to the innovation team. So I worked on the footwear innovation team for 3 years, which was really fun. I was able to get out of running, which was good actually, to get just some insights into some other sports, into some different athletes, just really understand what the needs are across all these different places that were separate from running, where I'd worked most of my career. And then, 2019, I came back onto the inline running team, and right now I manage all of inline running for New Balance, as well as the pace team, which is kind of our interim innovation team. So we have a team that's looking at things 3 to 5 years out, and we have a team that's looking at things kind of between 18 months and 3 years out, which is an extension of the inline team. And then the inline team working on anywhere from a 12 to 18 month kind of development calendar, as it were.
Cool. Well, it's so great to have you both. I think, Danny, one thing you mentioned was how your time outside of just the inline running stuff was pretty valuable. Right now, I'm in a graduate program that's an interprofessional doctorate program. So I'm in the physical therapy realm and like applying all of the studies and research to that. But there's people who are working with like water tables and all of this stuff. And the way that they think about things actually has been super helpful to inform how I can move forward with the program. So I think there's huge value, like you just said, in getting exposure and experience in other places, because people think differently. And if we can be exposed to people who are thinking differently, it can really help us grow. One more question for both of you regarding New Balance. What would you say is your favorite thing about being part of the New Balance team?
Let Danny go first. Do you want me to go? I would say,
You went first last time, so I was going to say, why don't you go first?
yeah, I can go then. I think it's really just the collaboration across. I think one thing, playing off of what you just said on kind of learning from other people and learning from different sports and all that kind of stuff, especially in our sports research lab, it's a very collaborative effort. We talk through all the research that we're doing. We go over study design, all of that stuff, as well as just the different products that come in. So you're really able to, within our group, we kind of have that strong collaboration across all the different products. And then collaborating with people like Danny on the inline team, to the pace team, to the innovation team, the engineers, the designers, all that stuff. It really is cool to kind of see that product come to life, and it's really exciting to actually be able to maybe make a benefit to some athletes.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think mine kind of lines up fairly similarly. It's such a unique place, to have a business of our side that's 100% kind of owned and managed is really, really unique. Jim Davis is the owner of New Balance, and his own personality and his culture runs through so much of what we do, which is really interesting. And it gives us a lot of opportunities to think differently, to work differently. I would suggest it's the least hierarchical structure I've ever worked in, ever. I think it's just, to Ethan's point, it's super collaborative. If you've got an idea or if you want to do something, we're not making money for shareholders. We're trying to make shoes better, or we're trying to do things better for a consumer. So there's a lot of scope and there's a lot of opportunity to do unique and different things, ultimately all focused around the consumer and can we provide the best, in our instance, the best running experience for them, whether it be working through Ethan's team or from a design standpoint or a development standpoint, innovation standpoint,
That's awesome. So a pretty empowering environment, it sounds like, and just structure of things to let people push forward their passion and their knowledge, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So I have one more kind of big picture question for you both before Matt kind of takes over and starts talking about the meat of this shoe, because we're going to start talking about well, it's funny. When you think of it's SC Trainer, if you kind of go the full thing, so you're like MLS, like these teams that are trying to determine if they're football club or soccer club, like you just get them both in this shoe, SC Trainer. But
well, that's good. I thought I was making it easier for everybody, so I appreciate the fact that you suggest that maybe I haven't made it easier for everybody.
No, that's good. It is all coming in. It's all coming in line. You know what the SC is going to get you now, and no, it's good. But tell us a little bit about. You talked a little bit, Danny, about how far forward you guys project ideas. So how long ago? This will be a good question for Danny. How long ago did this shoe start coming into the kind of thought process, and what was the original goal when thinking about this shoe?
It's an interesting one, and I'm going to be super honest with you guys, because sometimes the way these things work and flow isn't perfect, and I think we portray an image of like everything lining up exactly how we want, and that isn't always how we're making shoes by hand at the end of the day. It isn't always as clean cut as that. We started with FuelCell back in kind of the first shoe we brought to market was back in kind of 2017, 2018. With the 5280, which ultimately has informed so much of what we've done over the last kind of 5 or so years in terms of the platform in general. The thing about that shoe that was super unique, obviously, is that we were looking at the road miles, because that's where we had athletes of the caliber that could go out and break records, and making a product or a solution for them first and foremost was really what we were looking for. What it meant was we were still looking at shoes with a relatively low stack height, and in many ways we were talking about like track spikes for the road when it came to that product. And what that made us do is overemphasize some density in terms of material in the midsole, as well as like unique instances in terms of the carbon fiber that we were using. And in many ways that lined up better for a distance training shoe than a distance racing shoe. So we brought the FuelCell TC to market, I don't know when would that have been, around 2019. And in many ways, this is an extension of that. While the whole time we were waiting for the materials that we needed for the SC Elite or RC Elite to come to life, because those things were happening at the same time, but we're on a different cadence to where we were based on the 5280. So we dovetailed really easily into the trainer, and then also, should I say, into the TC, and then into the trainer. while we were creating the RC Elite on the side of that, if that makes any sense.
So that actually goes really nicely into my question about, so it's interesting hearing, and I'm starting to get this where, when you're doing this and you're creating a product, you have to work with what you have, and you can be planning further down the line, but at a certain point you need to have the material available for you to be able to get that market to product. So how has the fuel cell evolved over these years? Because I remember seeing it early. We had other versions like the Rebel, the RC Elite 1. Now we're going into 2. We're seeing 3, and then we're seeing this as well. So how has that evolved? And it sounds like it's continuing to.
Yeah, and Matt, it's a cliche that says you only get like one chance to make a first impression, right? And when it comes to something like a racing shoe that you really want to focus on enhancing somebody's performance, it's really important that the materials that go into that product are ready and they're right and they're tested and they're validated. And Ethan's done all the VO2 testing or impact testing or energy return testing that we want, So I think it's important, to your point, that as you evolve these things, you have what you need to do them in the best possible way. Fuel cell for us is a platform, right? And it's not just in running. It exists in tennis, it exists in basketball, it exists in all of the sports that we play in. And as you can imagine, what Emily Sisson needs to hopefully do really well and win the New York Marathon is very different to what Kawhi Leonard needs to kind of win the NBA Finals, right? And all of those things are fuel cell. What's important to us is that there's a minimum energy return threshold that the material has to be above to be considered fuel cell. And in the case of somebody like Kawhi, we're talking about in the realm of like 25 hardness points difference in his shoe versus an SC Elite. So when you think about the scope of what that needs to be across all of these different sports, there's a ton that goes into it. And, I think one of the biggest things for us has been the question around weight, right? And what we've seen from an evolution standpoint in terms of the fuel cell platform is how do we reduce some of the densities of the materials to bring some of the weights down while maintaining or ideally improving the energy storage and return for those materials and then the overall shoe construction, as it were. And I think those have been the biggest evolutions in terms of fuel cell. Ethan probably remembers all the way back to where we were 2018, 2019, and what some of those things are, and ultimately what it is today. I also think this will be the last one, and then I'll shut my trap. But like I think in some ways we also confused a few consumers because we went out with like multiple different hardnesses within the fuel cell platform. With a shoe like the Prism, we were thinking about stability as well as energy return, whereas a shoe like the SC Elite, it's all about that function, right? And I think what we've learned as well is that we've really narrowed the focus in terms of what those materials are. We're always improving upon them and replacing what exists within the fuel cell kind of family with new materials. But it's constantly thinking about how do we keep that suite of foams relatively concise, at least within running, and provide the ultimate benefit that we can.
I think that's a really helpful thing you just brought up, where fuel cell is a family of foams. It's not one thing that gets thrown into every product across various lines, and I think that is something that gets confusing even for shoe testers, right? So like we get sent shoes and then we get a tech sheet that kind of gives us height, weight, or stack height and weight and things like that, and it says it has this foam in it, but the name of the foam doesn't necessarily tell you the properties of it that were tested in the lab, because you tune those, it sounds like, to the type of shoe that you're developing.
Yeah, and a good example of that will be the shoe that we're going to talk about now, the Trainer, because the foam in the SC Elite and the trainer in the foam in the SC Trainer is different. And the hardness is fairly similar. The energy return is really similar, but the density is higher in the Trainer, and that's because we knew when we wanted to go as high as we did that material had to have some guts to it that would allow that person to have the necessary stability, to your point, Matt, earlier, the necessary longevity for more of a training solution than where the SC Elite is. So even within our own family of stuff, we're tweaking and using different things that we think ultimately are going to benefit the consumer based on what we believe that their needs for the product is.
I really like how you said that. It sounds like people need to remember that each shoe is going to have unique features to it, because at the end of the day, you're creating a solution. So, a consumer or an athlete has a problem, or I wouldn't maybe not say a problem, but a a gap or something, a tool that they need, and this is a solution. And every solution is going to be completely different depending on what the needs of that individual is, right? So I'm going to encourage anybody that's listening or watching, we dive into the different types of foams a lot more with Jeff Burns. That's a really good, intense episode to listen to on some of the variations of this. And that, yeah, when you get a foam like FuelCell, it's each shoe is going to oftentimes have a different combat, and when you start changing how this is made, right, it totally can change the features of the shoe from something that's really firm, right, like as you mentioned with the Prism, to something as bouncy and soft as something like the SC Elite or the SC Trainer. It's just you can change that depending on what the purpose of the product is. And as we say, footwear is a tool. You got to figure out what the right tool for the job that you're looking for is. So I like that.
Ethan, when you look at the FC Trainer, what can you tell us about how you go about testing that foam in the lab, and why you guys made the decisions you did about choosing these specs of this foam for that shoe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to build off some of what Danny said and the amount of testing that we do in the lab space, basically any foam that's for this, or for FuelCell, or for any performance product that we have, ends up getting tested in the lab. Going through cycling, impact testing, energy return scores, everything you can think of to know what this foam can help an athlete with or have once it's actually in a shoe, we do. So it's really trying to figure out and mix and match those foams to best fit the brief or what this shoe is intended for. So when we're talking about the SC Trainer, it's trying to put together something that can have that body, that can be such a high stack height, has the energy return scores that are able to allow us to store and return so much energy, and that's kind of the goal, or one of the goals of the shoe when we set out for it. So it's really trying to kind of narrow down what are our options, and then kind of going from there. But a lot of it is like those mechanical testings to start out, and then once you get it to the mechanic, like kind of get through the mechanical side and the shoe's made, that's when you kind of get the athletes into the lab space and go through different testings with them. We have done obviously testing where it's one foam versus another foam, or both mechanically and then also with human subject stuff as well.
So if we're going to talk about foams, obviously the other thing we got to ask about, right, is when it comes to this shoe, you have a massive visible plate. So can you talk us through how the design of the EnergyArc came about? What was the intended goal of that? It's very unique, right, to have that much exposed.
Yeah, I'll go first. I was actually still on the innovation team when we first started with EnergyArc as a solution that ultimately then went into the Pacer and into the Trainer, and you'll see that in the SC Elite as we move down the line. The biggest thing for us was how can we maximize energy storage and return? And that's where the design came from, that's where the shape came from, that's where the unique properties and the technology came from. Obviously, it was about combining the ingredients that we had, or new ingredients that we had available for a shoe like this, but it was with a very, very clear goal, and that was, we know what we can do right now, but if we wanted to maximize these things, what is our best opportunity to do that? And that's where EnergyArc came from.
Yeah, I think too as well with that, I think from the literature and in-lab research and all the research that's been done, it's kind of knowing that energy return total matters a lot, and it's improving athletes' performance. So it's figuring out how can we bring that up as much as possible. So that's, like Danny said, that's kind of where this all started. And it went from basically cobbled together foam plaques of like a carbon fiber that's been molded, like hand molded, to all this other different compounds that were kind of cut and pasted together to kind of actually getting into a shoe form. So there's a lot of iterations that kind of went along the way for the shape of the midsole, the shape of the carbon fiber, and kind of the entire setup, as it's just like it kind of all works together to really get us that energy return that we were looking for.
It makes my heart so happy to hear somebody mention that, yes, it's the combination of factors that really makes the shoe what it is, right? Everybody likes to get into their camps, and yes, from the literature, we know that the foam obviously plays one of a major factor, right? But then you also need the components of the plate to stabilize that kind of foam to facilitate that forward motion in that direction. So it's nice to hear somebody go, yes. So the listeners, right, who always get really fixed on one thing, remember, it is the combination of the factors that really makes this, not necessarily one individual thing, but there are some interesting components. So And that's what must be difficult, right? Because you're testing a very multifaceted problem, right? So you're looking at this like very complex solution. How do you test all those people? Do you start with testing one thing at a time? Do you start, do you combine those? What does that look like? If you can tell me. Sometimes some of that stuff is proprietary, so I understand if I'm digging into areas you can't talk about.
I think I can talk a little bit about just from the start, almost at like a plaque level, which is, plaques of foam or just like cutouts or blocks of foam that we have in carbon fiber. And as the EnergyArc kind of concept is, it's the combination of the shape of the foam as well as the shape of the plate. So it started with, if we have a foam block and then change the plate shape, what happens to the energy storage, energy return? If we cut out foam from this foam block but have this plate shape, what happens? If the plate is flat, but we have foam cut out, what happens? So it's like different iteration. It's obviously taking that scientific, exploration and that study design to really figure out, okay, it seems like this shape is kind of working the best for us. Taking this amount of foam out is working the best for us. How can we combine them to kind of get that right ingredients mix that gives us that benefit that we're really looking for? So there was, like I said, there was a lot of iterations that got us to that point. This was when I was an intern still, so I was hammering away in the back trying to impact test stuff and make sure that we got the right results we were looking for.
Ethan he's very polite. There's no doubt we drove him crazy with the amount of options we made and the different things that we kind of look at. I can still think about being in Lawrence and just looking at that full kind of table with just all these things on them, many of them that didn't do anything, right? And I think that's part of the process too, right? Just because you think something's going to really work and be a game changer for you doesn't necessarily mean that that's ultimately the case. And I can still remember a lot of conversations where Ethan came back to us and said, yeah, didn't work. And we're like, oh, we're sure that one was going to work. But then ultimately, like refining our process, getting ourselves to the point where we had the shape we needed, we had the material that we needed, and we had the void that we needed to, do the job that allowed us to get the highest energy storage and return of any shoe at New Balance to date, which is awesome.
And so, when you guys talk about energy storage and energy return, would that be synonymous with the term resilience, like where the foam is going through its compliance and then, returning to its original shape? So is there anything you can tell us about the changes you saw with putting in this shape of the plate in terms of the resilience of these kind of foam block and plate combinations from your testing? Or is that one step too far?
I think I can talk a little bit about just kind of the process again and thinking through. We were basically trying to figure out how do you get, because I'll say energy storage and energy return, like totals, is a combo of both of those. It's the compliance. It needs to be able to displace down. Like you need to be able to squish this foam to get this return, this benefit. And you also need to have that percentage that I kind of say resilience is almost the percentage. It's like how much is it going to spring back that percent return? So you need both of those to be really high to get the benefit or the best benefit that we're really looking for. So the combo here is really just you're adding the compliance as well as the resilience. So it's really the combo together is why it works. So there was a lot of iterations where, for example, if like the foam cutout, we obviously have that foam cutout because when it was filled with foam, we didn't get the compliance that we were looking for. So there's all that kind of takes into account so you can actually get that right amount and actually get that energy return score, but amount, going higher.
Yeah. And you did see differences, though. When you put in the EnergyArc shape versus maybe your old plate shape, there were differences in some of those scores
exactly.
for resilience. Yeah. Cool.
So I'm going to let David take some of the stuff on the cutouts and the shaping. But I have two kind of questions in terms of, and this might be, this is a really, really broad question, but kind of succinctly, can you explain how you go about testing this stuff? Specifically, like what's going on? And again, you might not be able to say, but like what sort of lab testing on a person? What do you typically do?
Yeah.
Height specifically.
No, I'm just in terms of how are you determining like the efficiency, running economy, and all those kind of things. I'm assuming it's going to be different. There's different testing that we've been exposed to, but is there anything unique that what New Balance does in terms of their lab testing? Either from the lab person or materials. Yeah.
Yeah. So from the lab perspective and kind of how we tackle most of the shoes and stuff that Danny sends down to us, or kind of we work together with, is mostly you kind of start with the mechanical side, and really understand what are the differences there. Impact testing or like squishing the shoe all the way down. There's tons that we're flexing it. There's a ton of different mechanical tests that we do. So we start there to really understand, is this shoe different than the last one? Because obviously if this shoe is the exact same mechanically, it's really tough to say we're going to have a change. Like it's when you put it on a person, they could be different, but it might not be. And it's when you have it change mechanically, you're more likely to see it on a person. So that's kind of where we start. And then when we bring it to human subject testing and performance testing, we do a lot of submaximal VO2 stuff, obviously with measuring running economy. Especially in 2019, we were doing a lot of it pre-pandemic, and then pandemic happened, and we had a little shutdown for a little bit, but then it started back up, obviously. But for this shoe, and we had a lot of iterations to kind of this and kind of that. This is, like Danny said, also the time of the RC Elite kind of becoming the life too. So it was a combo of both of these kind of running through, doing a lot of VO2 testing. So that's the main stuff that we do for testing wise. But then also we've done some biomechanical testing as well to try and almost like a check to make sure, are people running differently? Is it something that we should be concerned about? Stuff like that is kind of our secondary test to make sure that we're all doing okay.
So I really like that, because again, that's my PhD is on biomechanics and movement science, and looking at how people move differently, especially as they age or different other factors that might influence them. Especially from a injury and a PT standpoint, that's something I'm interested in. So it sounds like you go through the typical gold standards within footwear world of, hey, looking at some of the compression, like foam compression tests and the mechanical tests, right? Looking at the different stiffnesses and bending and torsional points that normally do. And then once you go, hey, this is different, right? This is something significant, or maybe I shouldn't use that word. Kind of, you got to be careful with that one. But then go, hey, now we'll start looking at how is this affecting the economy of runners, but also going, hey, can we also start looking at biomechanics? Is there anything we need to be worried about? Is there anything that might actually be great, right? So it's I'm sure it's a balance of those two, going, this is really good, or I don't know what's going to happen here, right? It's probably a unique balance.
Yeah, and it's really all about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And were there any on the biomechanical side of things with the FC Trainer? Was there anything, the SC Trainer, was there anything that you saw that changed with the runners that you were testing compared to some of your other models?
Nothing that we, nothing that we really would say, or if made this large difference that would be worth really talking about, I guess.
Okay, cool.
So before David's got to go, he has some great questions here, but I am geeking out right now because a lot of this information, right, there hasn't been a lot of public research on this. So with all the companies we get to talk to, and you guys being so kind to give us your time, we're hearing bits and pieces about people learning these lessons about, hey, when you do the foam like this or put this geometry here, it kind of starts doing this thing. If you do the plate like this, it kind of starts doing this thing. So there are lessons being learned, and I'm sure that's really fun for both of your standpoints to go, hey, creating product, testing it. Is there any, and the problem is a lot of the stuff I know is proprietary, but is there any potential, or am I missing something is there any publishable data that might be going public soon on any of the stuff with the lessons you're learning?
We have done some testing with some universities in the past on different versions of our Elite products. I'm not sure at what point we'll do publications on, and I think a lot of it ends up, obviously the 4% study is kind of that all-encompassing one that kind of started this whole thing. So I think all brands have kind of gone towards doing some external validation, and obviously we have too. So I'm not sure at what point or if all that results will be published, but we'll kind of see down the road for that.
I just want to throw that out as some encouragement for that. I think this stuff is really cool, but that's me. I'll just stop talking.
Well, I guess that leads to me then. So when we take a look at the SC Trainer, I mean, the stack height, the geometry, this shoe is pretty saucy. So how did you guys settle upon the stack height, the geometry? I mean, obviously it's a high stack rocker. It's kind of the thing that's been trending right now, and you guys are using the modern fuel cell technology and everything there. But how did you guys settle upon your stack heights, your geometry, and everything that goes into this training model?
Danny, do you want to?
Yeah, I can start it. I feel like it's a question for you, Ethan. We looked at so many different elements. We took midsole heights all the way up to 72 millimeters in our kind of learning around the shoe. I put one of those on and tried to run around a corner, which didn't work out fantastically well. But we looked at multiple different heights across a whole spectrum, with plates, without plates. We looked at plate length, whether 4 foot, mid-foot, 3/4, full length, to try and understand what that could look like. We looked at heel voids, we looked at 4-foot voids, we looked at all of these different things just to try and understand how all of these different elements and this system could work best. And again, David, it's around trying to make sure that we can store as much energy and return as much energy as we can in this product that's really focused on a training athlete. First and foremost, we know people are going to run in it race in it, should I say, and they're going to have all these similar benefits when they race in it too. But there's a real skew here towards thinking about training first and foremost, and what those needs are. That really got us to where we've netted out in terms of all the different elements in that shoe.
Yeah, and I can.
Yeah, and leaning it. Go for it.
I was just going to say, I would like to kind of feed off what Danny said from the stack height perspective and going up to 72 millimeters. That was kind of some stuff that we kind of came up with in the lab as we were going through the testing of the shoe in different versions. It was really trying to figure out. We keep seeing some benefit as we keep going taller. As Danny started out the 5280, you're kind of in that low stack height. We keep going taller, and we're not seeing much of a degradation in performance. So how tall can we go till we hit like a tipping point almost is kind of where some of that thought process went. So that's where we got to 72 millimeters, and that was right around COVID. So Danny was running around in those tall ones outside.
I will say I gain a couple inches when I wear these, so that's always a plus, right?
You said a literal tipping point, right? Because you fall over eventually when the stack height is
oh my
too high,
goodness,
correct? And then my second follow-up, somewhat joke. Danny, so if you trip and fall and sprain your ankle, is that considered a work comp injury? Or no?
No comment.
No comment. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's a smart answer.
That's a dirty phrase, I understand, so I'm sorry. I will sit quietly over
here. That was a great answer, by the way. But so with this shoe specifically, focusing more on the training aspect side of things, did you guys find an ideal weight to cushion ratio that you guys have dialed in on, that you're like, this is a pretty ideal weight to do daily training in?
Yeah, I would say that we're within the sweet spot of where we felt like we needed to be. I think Matt made a comment about durability again earlier on, right? I think one of the key pieces here is that we wanted to make sure that the shoe had the necessary durability to work more in a training environment than a true racing environment, first and foremost. Having the necessary stability and function that a more general consumer would need as well, I think is another key element here. And then, to your point, like the maximizing energy return was what it was about for us, right? But as you thinking about cushioning and impact protection and all of those things, that definitely goes hand in hand with getting us to like the final solution, as it were.
Yeah. I have to give you guys some kudos too, because I'm notorious for taking shoes in areas where they're not supposed to be going. And so I took this through a couple of different trails and areas that were probably relatively unstable. I didn't die, so that was cool.
Yeah. It's good to know. I think this is an inside story for you guys, but one of the biggest things that we had to solve for with this unique system was not cracking the plate when it gets where it gets close to the road, right? And when you hear about you, David, running on varied surfaces and things like that, where there might be stones and rocks and things like that, we had quite a lot to solve for, right, where the plate gets really close to where the road is, just because if there's one key negativity with carbon fiber is that if you puncture it, it shatters, right? And that's where that rubber piece right on the forefoot there to just try and protect the plate and stop any kind of issues happening is where that came from.
I like that. I didn't realize that's what that was for. That is a very good solution.
I actually did catch that because I was like, you can feel that foam decompress a little bit and compress a little bit. And then when you load that forefoot, I was like, this has to be for abrasion. There's no other reason. Like, make sure this thing doesn't snap.
Yeah,
but
that's definitely one thing about this shoe. So where I live, I'm in central Wisconsin. We have, I'm in a small town, but we have this trail that goes around the entire town. It's 24 miles, or it has 31 miles of trail, and it's all like crushed gravel. And this is just not the shoe for that, obviously. When I go on there for a quarter mile, and this, this wedge or the cutout here is full, the void is full of rocks, but that's not what I use it for. When I go out, I use it on the road for kind of high mileage. I've really enjoyed it for that. And it can really go, obviously people can read our reviews, but it can go at a lot of paces. And I found that pretty exciting as well when you have a shoe that gets really high stacked. We've had issues with stability in the past, or we've not had issues. We've seen them where if something isn't structured in such a way that keeps at least a little bit of assistance toward the center, you can have some problems, and it can be less accessible for more people. How much was the design of this cutout geared towards that ideal of kind of creating a platform that's runnable and stable?
Ethan, do you want to talk about the cutout shapes?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I think the cutout, the primary goal was to do the energy return and improve that energy return score was really the thought process for it. I think some of the secondary stuff has been the stability, and I think our first consideration for the stability really was around the width of the entire shoe as well as the plate itself. Things like that where you're having a really rigid plate the entire span so that it is adding that stability basically all across the shoe and not just in a very thin line as it kind of goes down, as you can kind of expect other carbon fiber shoes are. So it's really trying to kind of all encompassing. So it's with that plate width, with the overall width of the shoe. I think we get a lot of stability from there. And then I do think the compression of kind of, we've been calling almost pontoons, is kind of how that the shoe's kind of set up with that. They're able to compress, and I think that also allows, and they kind of splay out a little bit. That allows for such high displacement, but it really also helps a lot with that stability too.
Nice. Well, I got one more final question for you guys on my end. It's a little bit of a loaded question because it's going to be thinking about who this is for and who this isn't for, and that's exactly what this question is. So when we're looking at a shoe that's this high stack, this soft, and with this stiff of a plate, some people are really going to respond to this. Have you found that there's anyone that this shoe probably would not work for?
It's an interesting question, and it kind of goes back to what Nathan said earlier. I feel like we've found that multiple people at multiple speeds have really enjoyed running in the shoe, from everyday people all the way to our, elite athletes that are training in it and obviously not racing at it at this time. I think one thing we've also heard is that notion of set it and forget it, getting into a cadence that you want to be at, getting into like a long run speed that you want to be at. The shoe just in many ways just goes and does it for yourself. It does it for yourself in some ways, which has been, really interesting. Again, thinking about where the use case is here, from kind of Wednesday tempos all the way to Sunday long runs. We're seeing a consumer daily gravitate to this type of product for racing in it. And I think, we're just seeing more and more people come into this space. One of the key benefits of this shoe is really giving people the opportunity to have all of these unique benefits in a training environment, and then being able to switch over to a racing environment if and where they want to. One thing we've heard from people is that going from an 880 to an SC Elite, from kind of training to racing, is such a big jump, and it kind of makes it a bit of a challenge. And with a shoe like the Rebel, as well as with a shoe like the SC Trainer, whether it be utilizing the materials or utilizing the same technology in the trainer as in the racing shoes, that's very much the thought process. Like, how do we create a suite of products that, maybe a higher level runner can utilize multiple different shoes kind of in their weekly rotations, or having something like this that can be general enough that an everyday person can get in it and really enjoy it. David, I'm not going to say to you that it's for everybody, because it's not, right? But we have seen through broadening the base, through increasing the density of the material, thinking about where we've wanted to place the rubber, a slightly more substantial upper than you might find in a racing shoe as well. We've just broadened that consumer base for this shoe enough that we're really hopeful that a lot of people will be able to get in it and really enjoy it.
Yeah, and I'll just say from personal experience, I have responded well to this shoe. I think the security through the upper, the platform, the geometry, this shoe has worked well for me. And it's been a shoe that I've just drawn to for my easy days. And yeah, it's worked well. So I just wanted to challenge you guys a little bit and throw that out there.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question on this. So Danny, you mentioned that part of the, again, thinking about trying to create a solution was going, hey, we've got this amazing, the FuelCell RC Elite 1, 2, and now we're going to have the SuperComp Elite that's going to be coming out shortly. What I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that going, oftentimes when you go from some of the more traditional foams and shoe designs to what we have now in terms of these elite racing shoes, that's a big jump, right? Those are very, very different stimuli. And that, at the end of the day, that's what tools are. They're very different stimuli. It's not just, hey, I'm going to put this shoe on, I'm going to suddenly go run fast. It's, I need to adapt my mechanics to this shoe. I need to get used to it, which is why we always encourage people, do not suddenly put on a brand new shoe right before that you've never experienced before a race or some really intense effort, because there's these shoes, again, your body has to get used to it. Anything that's too sudden and too quick or too extreme of a stimulus might predispose you to injury, regardless of what it is. But what I'm hearing is this might be a better way to ease into this, going, hey, I might not be able to train in a shoe like the Elite, but I want to get used to this so that when I transition to do it for workouts or races or whatever I want to use it for, that transition's maybe a little bit easier. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. And, again, this is one that started with our athletes and then led into different consumers. We have all of our athletes, or many of our athletes, training in an 880 for the longest time, and then jumping into these products for workouts or jumping into these products for long runs, and feeding back to us that the transition between those two things is really, really large. I don't think we'll ever be in a situation where a 880 goes away as a kind of staple everyday training shoe. But as you start to think about getting into an environment where you're getting closer to races, or even on days where you like not feeling that good, and you want to put something on that's just going to provide a little bit of a benefit for you, we definitely are seeing this notion that training and racing in similar type products, or products that are benefiting the racing ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a real opportunity there. And again, like I said, a shoe like the Rebel comes into that as well, because it's sharing the foams, but it doesn't have the plate, right? So you're getting the benefit of the foam, and you're understanding how the foam feels underneath your foot, making it then easier to transition into the racing shoe, or thinking about it in the case of the trainer, where you've got a similar foam and you've got the carbon fiber plate in a more training focused setup that allows you then to more easily transition into the racing shoe.
So it's definitely the balance of going, that transition's easier, but to your point, right, the 880 is never going to go away, the 1080 is never going to go away. And we talk about this, Malazzo, one of the people that we've had on over from Europe who's done some wonderful research on footwear, had some good research that demonstrated that if you have multiple pairs of shoes and have different stimulus, that can actually reduce your injury risk, right? But at the same time, when it comes to performance optimization and getting your body used to it, you do also want to start utilizing those kind of designs for what you're ultimately going to be performing at. So it sounds like you're creating a really nice balance and giving more solutions for what customers need, or athletes, as it may be.
I think we've had this conversation in the past on our podcast about, is it better to, thinking about the analogy of, this guy going out before he swings a baseball bat, he puts the weight on his bat, swings with a heavy bat, goes up to the plate, and then, it feels lighter after he takes that weight off the bat. So that, should you train in something heavy and so different, and then you go strap on this super light thing and then you fly and take off? Or is the other way, this gives the feet to the other way of thinking about it, where creating an environment that's very similar to where you need to actually perform can be beneficial from a motor learning perspective. And so I think that just gave a lot of feet to that previous conversation we had. I don't know how long ago, but it's been a while. So
it has been.
I appreciate that insight there. Ethan, a question for you. With the SC Trainer here, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of, people who might be thinking, hey, I want to race in something even higher stack, because I'm not going to be going and winning anything. Like, I don't need it to be, legal, quote unquote, for, the standards. What kind of results were you seeing from a running economy perspective for a shoe like this? And have you guys also looked at the idea of fatigue resistance when it comes to training in shoes like this?
I'll do fatigue resistance, I guess, first, just because, and I'm going to say this is more anecdotal evidence that we've gotten from a lot of our athletes. I know Danny's gotten a lot of comments as well from our athletes that afterwards, after running in marathons and 10Ks, legs feel better afterwards. We've also kind of heard some of this with some of our track spikes that kind of end up using a lot of this FuelCell foam. And it's just, they kind of feel fresher the next day, stuff like that. So that's always been something that we've been curious about. We haven't had enough time yet to kind of really dive into like a long-term study on some of that stuff, but it's something that we're really, really interested in because it is something anecdotally that keeps popping up, I think, a lot on these super shoes, is that you do kind of feel a little better afterwards.
Right.
For the benefit perspective, we saw a benefit with this shoe versus we did a couple different test comparisons. I won't say how much, but we did see a benefit in VO2 for the athletes that we tested in this shoe. And I think it's, like you said, it's a great option for some people who are maybe they just don't feel as comfortable in that SC Elite category where it is a little slimmer. It feels like it should be something that should be running a little faster. All of those kind of combos of kind of where those super shoes lie in. This is a great way to get the benefits that you're seeing in those shoes, but kind of in a way that feels a little bit more adaptable to somebody who kind of isn't running at that speed or isn't feeling like they're going to be ahead of the pack, but it really can still give you a benefit. We have done, obviously, a lot of the VO2 stuff is done on the elites, but we've done numerous amount of VO2 stuff in-house that's been not on elites. On myself, Danny's been a subject. I don't know if he was a subject for the VO2 testing that we've done, or one of the VO2 testing that we've done for this shoe. But so yeah, we do it plenty of times on recreational runners that are not running at the super fast speeds, and we still see a benefit sometimes. So it can work for anybody.
Cool. And are you?
I got a good anecdote for you, Nathan. In like just in terms of that comment or that question, we have a ton of really good athletes that are training at altitude all the time.
Yeah.
Not coming down to sea level and then going back, whether they be based in Boulder or Crested Butte or some of these areas full time. And the feedback that we got a lot was they felt like the product was allowing them to train at a high altitude 12 months of the year without the negative impacts of what that might be of being up there all the time if they were in an 880 or something like that. So really benefiting from this product, and to your point, the comment around recovery and being able to recover that much faster in a shoe like this, just even when they were based at altitude.
Cool. Yeah, and I think anecdotally for us, we've talked about this on our little group chat that we use way too often. We talk to each other way too much. But we've talked about how when we get done with a longer run in the shoe, your legs just don't feel as tired. Both all of us on here as well as some of the other people who've been testing the shoe. So I think anecdotally you'll see that in our review that we've found that with some of these longer runs, you just kind of get done and it lets you get the miles in, and it doesn't force you to run fast. I've kind of mentioned that before, but Ethan, going back to seeing some of the benefit from a VO2 perspective, you don't have to tell me the exact shoe, but is that compared to like training shoes? Is that compared to older racing shoes? Is that, what are you guys using as a comparator when you do those studies?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've done both in some capacity. So basically, as I'm sure you guys know, with the VO2 testing, you have basically 6 minutes of running in a shoe that you're able to get 5 to 6 minutes where you're getting VO2 from, and you're kind of taking the last little bit of it to kind of get that steady state for running economy. So we kind of try and max out, so just kind of like some of the 4% studies and stuff like that, max out the number of comparisons that we have so that we're not fatiguing the individual, but still able to get data on shoes that we want to compare against. So we compared against a trainer, we compared against some racing shoes as well at the time of testing this shoe. So usually our max is 4. I like to, if we can, do 3 shoes as our comparison, but it's always something that we're doing for sure.
And just from your biomechanical mind, this is more just a curiosity thing. This doesn't have to be New Balance specific, but have you seen trends with how certain runners run and who does well with different types of shoes? Like if it maybe thinking specifically with these kind of like quote super shoes that have the foam and the rocker, have you noticed a certain like runner profile that seems to run well with them, or not necessarily? What have you been noticing?
I think it's been interesting from our lab's perspective because there's definitely responders and non-responders on all these super shoes stuff, and it is really subjective. I've had plenty of times. I think if I remember the last time I did VO2 testing myself, I think out of everybody who did the test, I was the least responsive out of all the shoes. So I was like, wow, I'm not getting the benefit that everybody else was, which was kind of a bummer. But that's just sometimes how it goes. But yeah, so I can't necessarily tell, and I can for that study, it was people who were pretty similar size to me. It's not like their biomechanics were drastically different from me, like the force output, stuff like that was the same. So I think a lot of it is physiological, some randomness, maybe some biomechanics that comes into it. And when we think about VO2 stuff and when we're collecting that data, it is something that you can be really precise and do your best, but it is something that is, if there is some error into it, and I think VO should always kind of take that into consideration. If you're measuring for something that you get an 8%, that seems crazy. So it's always trying to think about kind of what's realistic and what's understandable. So I think it's all part of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Individual variability is just really high. It's just so wild.
That's got to be really tough because you're trying to say what effect does this shoe have on the person in terms of their VO2 max, which is a standard measure that we typically use for economy. But there's so many other factors that go into that in terms of like how people react to this platform, whether it be where, the length of their, where are they pivoting from versus where does that relate to what flex point there is in the plate, their nervous system, how quickly can they respond in terms of going through some of the like amelioralization phase, like eccentric to concentric, how quickly can they use that bounce? How does their nervous system respond? How are their muscle? All that kind of stuff. It's challenging to do this. And that's hopefully what people understand is we try to do these tests the best that I could, but research is never 100%. There's always challenges to this thing called internal validity. And so it's like, it's hard, but it's also really fun and really sexy to think about. At least maybe I'm a weirdo that I think about that, but it's fun too to kind of think about what else could be going on.
I'll plug our new sports lab in the sense of some capabilities that we have now to do while doing VO2 testing has been upgraded. So we can take force data, take motion capture data, do live scans, all that kind of stuff while doing VO2 data, which is new for our sports labs. So that's really exciting recently, being able to collect all of that other information that we haven't always done in the past at the same time, or it's at 2 different days, it's something like that. So being able to do that in real time has been awesome. So hopefully in the future we kind of I could get you towards a better answer for that. Because like you said, you're trying to measure, you're trying to know everything, and it's someone who comes into our lab space, and I don't know their muscle physiology. They're here for 2 hours. I'm trying to get them. I'm trying to get an answer. They're trying to just learn a little bit about themselves, and they think it's cool. So there's a lot that goes into it to really get down to that question. There's a lot of research and literature that's out there that has been pushing towards trying to figure out and answer those questions. That is really cool. That I'm excited to learn more about.
It's funny, though, because a lot of it right now, it ends up generating a lot more questions than answers, which is part of the fun of this, too. It's awesome that you both are contributing to this, because that's awesome why New Balance has that amazing sports lab to be able to start going, can we answer some of that stuff? So that's really fun, and we appreciate that you do that.
Danny, this might be a question for you, but when you look at we talked a lot about the development of FuelCell over this time. This year, we're seeing a couple different iterations of FuelCell coming out in different models. The FC Trainer is getting one that you talked about firmness points. It has a little bit more density inside of it versus the Elite that's coming out is a little bit, I don't know if softer is the right word, but less firmness points or more softness points, or what you can tell me which is the right terms. But what kind of is the trajectory that you guys are thinking about with the development of FuelCell? What are we going to be seeing the rest of this year? What kind of insights can you give us and our listeners?
Yeah, it's just becoming more and more of a critical platform for us daily, and as I said, it's not just running, it's across all of the sports that we play in, more and more. So FuelCell is the chosen platform. Even our kids team are identifying FuelCell as the platform that they want to, put their eggs in that basket as well. So more and more, we're seeing the FuelCell platform come to the fore within running. We got a ton of fun shoes this year. I don't know if you guys have seen the SC Pacer, but that's one that we launched a little bit earlier in the year that we're really excited about. Obviously more focused on 5K, half marathon, bringing some of the fun that used to be the 1400 back into racing, because so many consumers told us that they needed it or were missing it. We have a new Rebel coming towards the end of the year, which we're all super excited about. The Rebel V2 has been such a fun shoe for us. Almost everybody I know that, I hear from has done and really enjoyed that shoe for a wide variety of things. And we're excited that we're moving that on again with the V3. And then to that point, we've got the SC Trainer coming in and around the New York Marathon, and then with a larger launch date in February of 2023.
That's exciting. That's right. We loved the Rebel V2. We thought for a non-plated shoe that has such a soft platform. I don't know how. This is a question I have for you guys, because this is something that I've noticed with shoe design. Is a shoe that this is an example. So we have the FC Trainer. It's pretty flat geometry. Like the sides of the midsole are pretty flat. Whereas on the Rebel V2, there's kind of this ribbing that you see, this convexity to the midsole on the inside of the shoe. What I feel like I notice when you have that build out of foam and the convexity, it seems like it builds more cross bridges between the foam so that it compresses a little bit less in some areas and more in others. Is that actually what you're finding in the lab? Is that the thought process behind that design? Or is that aesthetic where you're just like, hey, putting this rib here looks pretty cool, so let's throw it on the inside of the shoe? Or is it a little bit of both? What can you tell us about that? Because we were impressed. I think the V2 won an award from us for our kind of end of the year stuff. So what are your thoughts there?
Just wait till you get to the V3. It's going to win multiple awards.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, the geometry is in many ways the most important element of the midsole. What I would say to you is that it's an art and a science all the time, right? So we want to make sure that things look as good as they possibly can, and then to that point, how do we want to make the midsole decouple? How do we want to make sure that it's stable enough? All of those things play a role in what those geometries are. One of the main reasons that SC Trainer is very straight and flat, as you pointed out, is just because it is more stable that way, and one of the reasons, going as high as we did, making sure that, again, we could get as many consumers in it and they felt like it would have what they needed to be able to go for long runs in it. And then, in many ways, the Rebel V2 is just so much fun, right? And it's less about that.
It's a lot of fun.
It's more about just giving the most unique experience to the consumer. And it's less about making sure that it's stable enough or it's secure enough. And it's all of these things. It's more around dialing the materials up to 10 and saying, just go out and see what you can do in it. And I think that's one of the most fun things about that shoe. And again, I was joking about the V3, but I feel like the V3 is going to be somewhere in the middle of that, because it's going to give you all of that uniqueness and all of that fun. But hopefully, again, we broaden the consumer set just a little bit for that shoe so that more people can just, experience the uniqueness of the Rebel, which is on a different planet in many ways.
Yeah. Awesome. I have one more question, and then I'll open it up to everybody else to ask some final questions. And that can be either from Matt and David or Danny and Ethan. If you have questions for us, we are open for them as well. But my last question is for you, Ethan, and just kind of your perspective. So you guys put out a lot of great shoes that could be used to run a marathon in, right? Like 1080, great shoe to run a marathon in. Obviously now you have, the Elite coming out, and you have this shoe, the SC Trainer, coming out. You have even the Pacer, which is lower stack, but that's not that low. It's still got a lot underneath your foot. Like, what's y'all's perspective on, does everyone need to grab for, an Elite, or find what's comfortable for you, or other? What's kind of your perspective on who should grab what for their marathon? Kind of focusing on the longer racing, I guess.
Yeah. I think you said it there on the most comfortable. I do think if we're talking about everyday person to elite athlete, it's always the most comfortable. There's always, there's so many things that can end up going wrong on some of those days, and you're always going to perform your best in what you feel comfortable in, no matter what. So stick with that. I do think, like, from the benefits and performance side of things, our SC Elite is the best that we have going. So we obviously push for that. But understanding that sometimes comfortability, all those things, they just play such a huge factor that for some reason athletes not feeling the best even that day in something that is like that. It's not like, it's not the end of the world if you have to take a little step back and throw on a 1080 and it's your home and you've been training at 1080 forever and you want to run your marathon in it, go for it, So.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Matt or David, do you guys have any final questions for them before we start wrapping up?
No.
This has been awesome.
Just a comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just excited for Rebel 3.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Then I did my job. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And Danny or Ethan, any questions for us before I wrap things up for us here?
All good.
I think I'm all set. Yeah.
Great. Well, again, we record on Sunday nights, and so we just really appreciate both of you giving up a weekend evening to spend this time with us and to talk to all of our listeners and our followers. If people have more questions that you want answers to, we can try to seek those out. So you can email us at doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com, doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com. We should get a shorter email. That's too long. Anyway, or you can reach out to us on Instagram. So that's at Doctors of Running. You can send us a private message. We always give this caveat. We get so many people asking us questions. And we really, if we had all the time in the world, if this wasn't our second jobs, if we weren't all full-time PTs and grad students and stuff, we would just sit and answer your questions as much as possible. But we do our best to try to get as many answers as we can, especially for the ones that are popping up more commonly. So please reach out to us. And if you want to see our review, again, it's on doctorsofrunning.com. And you can follow us again on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places that people share information. LinkedIn.
Yeah. As
That's
always,
Bach's new favorite thing.
Bach is growing LinkedIn. It's blowing up. He's loving it. He's amazing.
So again, Danny and Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. And we will talk to you all next time.
Thank you.